Hi, welcome back. So when I worked for an airline, I had access to highly discounted flight tickets. And I had a yearly quota that I could use for family and friends. So I offered them to many of my friends because I just wanted to share, kindness. The problem was it was time consuming to check in the system all the destinations, dates, and times where these cheap tickets were available. And availability and prices changed every day. Not only that, but these tickets got paid initially from my own salary. So in some months I had no salary because of all the tickets that I was purchasing for other people. Then I had to keep track of who owed me what because there was just so many. And then on top of that, my work days were so busy, extremely busy, and I hardly had time to eat or even to look up my own flight tickets. And some of those friends would email me and call me to ask for many flight options and combinations and they said they had urgency, and they would call me sometimes 8 times a day. So every time they contacted me, multiple times a day, it got me out of my focused zone during my work hours. And because of my long hours at work, I also didn't want to spend much time on this in my short evenings and weekends because it felt like work. At some point, I felt like I was basically a travel agent for a lot of my friends. But I never told them no. I never expressed that this was really bothering me. So at one point, after doing this for more than a year, I was really irritated. I was so irritated that I never wanted to see the face of one of these friends again. Can you imagine that? I felt exploited and used, and I said, that's enough. And not only did I quit doing that flight availability checks for them, but I also quit the relationship because I was so frustrated. But think about it. Whose fault was it? It was my fault, and only my fault. My friends were not evil. They weren't even trying to exploit me. I offered them something. They said yes, but I did not specify any boundaries, and those boundaries are my boundaries. I didn't say no when I got unhappy, and it wasn't critical at all. It was a favor. So you got to know what your limits are, and you have to be very clear on what your personal boundaries are. My boundaries could have been, I need 2 weeks of lead time to do check flights for you, and you can only change it once, and you can only use 1 flight per year, for example. That way, I'd still be helping them out, but it would be on my own terms. They'd have to follow my rules, and I wouldn't feel so annoyed. Okay, so let's talk about when do you say no. When you say no, establishing your boundaries, and when not to say no. So when do you say no? There are some situations where it makes sense to say no in most cases. So you can consider these a filter. So for example, if you have a moral or ethical conflict with the request, like helping someone cheat during an exam, or the requester tries to manipulate you to help them. So for example, someone tells you their life will be miserable if you don't help them. So you can check the bonus for an overview of the main manipulation tactics. So let's say the request is not a big deal and it clearly conflicts with your personal priorities. So for example, someone asks you to accompany them to a meeting so they can have some support, but it's just a standard meeting, it's nothing special. But you have an interview scheduled at that time. I know it's a bit extreme, but it gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. The request will significantly deplete your energy. So the other person might not know this, but it's a huge amount of effort for you. For example, a partner asks you to present a conference and you hate presentations. It really drives you crazy. The request will make you feel frustrated or upset. So for example, someone asks you to lend them money and they don't have a good track record on paying back on time. There are other people who are more obvious choices for the request, and you have other priorities. So for example, a colleague wants you to co-found a company and you're just not interested, but there's many other people who could do it very well or who could be great co-founders. Or for example, if it's a non-threatening last-minute problem because the requester didn't plan ahead of time, forgot something, or was careless, so they did something that caused that issue. In these cases, letting them assume the consequences for their mistakes will help them develop and work on their shortcomings. Of course, that doesn't work for everybody, right? This is not going to work for your boss, but for somebody who's at the same level, or in a way, somebody who reports for you or who's not an authority for you, that could work. So that's the first step. The second step is you also need to establish your boundaries. So when you set your boundaries ahead of time, you'll be in a better position to say no when a request that affects your boundaries comes along. Without the boundaries, you're going to be dealing with figuring out what your boundaries are, the pressures of time, and really confusing feelings. So it's important to have clarity of purpose and priorities to be clear and focused on the trade-offs of saying yes to a request. So you have to value your time, energy, and other resources that you have. Understand what you want to achieve with those resources, with that time that you have. Then, when do you avoid saying no, even if you want to say no? Don't say no when there is a definite contract that you must respect, and if you are not willing to pay the consequence of breaching the contract, because you know that even contracts can be breached, but usually there's some fine or a risk of something happening. So if your contract says that you need to give 2 months advance notice to your boss before leaving, you can't say no to that just out of the blue. You have to examine what the consequences are. Now, you can still negotiate it, but you can't unilaterally say no without assuming the consequences. Also, do not say no when you are in physical danger. This is really important. So if the safety committee, for example, asks you to put on a protection vest and you don't want to, don't say no. It's for your security, for your safety. You can ask questions, you can clarify, you can negotiate, but be aware of your physical situation. Same thing with some extreme bullying examples. So finally, just use your common sense, which is not the same thing as fear, to determine if there are dangers of saying no to any given situation. Give yourself permission to say no to anything that makes you unhappy or that drains your energy. So there's this quote, unknown author, but it illustrates very well what we're talking about. So the key takeaways are, in some situations, choosing to say no is more obvious, such as when there is a conflict with your moral or ethical self and priorities, when you're clearly being manipulated, when there are other choices available, when there's a small impact on others, obvious alternatives, or when you know you'll feel frustrated and unhappy. In other situations, you need to establish your own boundaries. However, in situations where there is a contract or physical danger, then consider, very carefully. Let's get to our activity. Identify your boundaries. So what are your boundaries? Are at work or in the organization where you work? And then complete the sentence, I am not willing to. These are your boundaries. I'm not willing to what at work? And then third, complete the sentence, I won't accept. What will you not accept? So here's some examples. What are your work boundaries? For some people, it might be, I need to leave work at 5 p.m. so I can pick up my kids at school. Complete the sentence, I'm not willing to live off hotels and travel all the time for work. I'm not willing to act in an unethical way. So I'm just giving you examples of of how this works. I won't accept anyone to treat me or my team disrespectfully. So this was actually something that was true for me. A lot of colleagues were treating my team disrespectfully, and I won't accept that. So answer those questions. It's a reflection. You can answer them in your mind, but I encourage you to write them down, and I will see you in the next lesson.